It's Friday, and it's time for our Agile Not So Agile episode of the Daily Stand Up Podcast. And today I have something interesting. Someone sent this article to me. Now, I want to give full transparency here. I did not have a chance to go through and fact check every single thing in this article, but I did find certain things about this article interesting that I wanted to share with you. And it is an Agile Not So Agile episode, so here we go. This article is titled The Untold Story Behind the Bridge Collapse, the Key Bridge Collapse in Baltimore, and it's by Ryan Fan. Now, he goes in and starts off with before 10 a.m. on Tuesday, March 26th, my phone blew up with at least 5 texts from friends and family asking if I was okay, since my wife and I live in Baltimore. I opened the news to see that Baltimore was on the front page of major news outlets like New York Times, Fox, etc. A bridge in a local area and suburbs, the Francis Scott Key Bridge, just collapsed after being struck by a container ship. It collapsed at 1:30 a.m. that day, and the horrifying video shows the ship striking a pillar and the bridge going down within seconds. I watched the video several times to see cars speeding rapidly across the bridge, hoping and praying they could get across before the bridge went down. It seemed like a freak, once-in-a-lifetime accident. Although I appreciated friends and family reaching out, I felt guilty. My wife and I were very unaffected. We don't live on that side of town, and we don't commute on that bridge, and are almost entirely unaffected. The area, however, is very industrial, and at that hour, I said that it would have unfortunately been workers who were most impacted by the collapse of the bridge. Let's pause there for a second. When tragedy strikes, that usually either brings out the best in us or the worst in us. And the fact that people were concerned and checking in on him, I think is a great thing. I think, you need to appreciate those people who love you enough to check in and make sure you're okay. But at the same time, you need to also make sure that you are being diligent about understanding what happens before you start talking about something. And I have a feeling that's the direction this article is going to go in. As more and more news and developments came out in the next few days, various outlets reported that 8 workers were on a bridge at the time of its collapse. They were construction workers who were repairing potholes. 2 were rescued very shortly after the collapse, but the other 6 are missing and presumed dead. This is sad. There's nothing at all about losing life that warrants celebration. But this is the part that alarms me. All 6 workers were immigrants from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico. They were young to middle-aged Hispanic men, many of whom had wives, siblings, and families in the country. All 6 are presumed dead. It seemed minor then that so many people were complaining about their commutes being longer. Some people I know have commutes that have extended over half an hour due to the collapse of the bridge. As traffic has had to reroute to other ways to get across the water, the impact of closing the Port of Baltimore to shipping, while also devastating, seemed minor. These were 6 men who came into this country to make a better lives for themselves and their families, who found themselves dead in a freak accident. That's sad. When I learned that all 6 people who were presumed dead on the Francis Scott Key collapse were Hispanic immigrants from Guatemala, Mexico, and Honduras, I immediately thought of an accident from last year that similarly felt like a freak accident. 2 drivers were driving over 100 miles an hour on a highway where the speed limit was only 55 miles an hour. The 2 got into a collision, and 1 car crashed through a construction barricade into 6 construction workers who were killed. The accident happened on I-695, the same expressway the Francis Scott Key Bridge is on March 21st of last year. One of the drivers was sentenced to 1.5 years in prison after pleading guilty to felony manslaughter. The other driver has her trial next month. I've lived in Baltimore for the last 5 years, and 695 is infamous for dangerous drivers and frequent accidents. It is a beltway that circles the whole Baltimore area, with frequent exits and on-ramps. There are several times I have taken the expressway as one route to get to work, and theoretically without traffic. It should be the fastest. Almost every time there's an accident that makes me late, and I'm usually extremely frustrated at the inconvenience until I see the severity of the accident that completely destroyed someone's car. 3 of the people who died in the 695 crash were also Hispanic men. I think we can all agree that fixing potholes at 1:30 a.m. on a bridge is an undesirable job. I would even say that fixing the road in broad daylight on a dangerous road would be an undesirable job. This is not to say there aren't white or black construction workers who die in freak accidents, as white workers also died when cars were going over 100 miles an hour in a construction site. But the line that's going around about victims of the Key Bridge collapse is that immigrants do the jobs that other people don't want to do. And that's very true. The 6 men who died on a bridge were repairing a bridge so people would have smooth rides home with their families in the morning. With these two tragedies in such close proximity to each other, it seems like it's just a very dangerous time to be a Hispanic construction worker in Baltimore, or a construction worker in general. No one expects a container ship to crash into a bridge and make it collapse. No one would ever expect cars to be driving 100 miles an hour and collide through a construction site. But we would be remiss not to acknowledge the disproportionate impact of these freak accidents. Despite my not being personally affected and living on the other side of I-695 as the Key Bridge, this accident still hit very close to home. I work in a school with a higher Hispanic population than the year before. Many of our Hispanic students are recent immigrants and English language learners, and I know enough Spanish to assist some of our students with their requests for help as long as they speak slowly enough for me to understand. One kid came to me recently to ask if he could change his English class because he didn't know any English, and a request I relayed. I have sat in classrooms trying to assist some of our students with disabilities and redirect them and explain concepts to them. In one instance, I noticed the table partner of one of my students seemed like he was on task and knew what was going on, and I didn't pay much attention. But as we switched to a new task, he struggled to follow along with the teacher's instructions. I tried to explain the directions to him, but he wasn't following along with me either. I realized the student didn't know a lot of English and was completely lost, just copying the teacher's writing on the board. I did my best to help the student too, but I did not know how to explain biology terms like chloroplast or mitochondria in Spanish. So I was limited in telling the student, the teacher wants you to write this here in Spanish. The teacher also did his best to Google Translate the slides into Spanish so he could understand. However, I felt very bad for the student to feel completely lost in a lesson due to their language barrier. Now, I'm not saying struggling through biology class because you don't know English and fixing potholes at 1:30 a.m. are the same thing. Being killed by a collapsing bridge at 1:30 a.m. is not the same as sitting through class and not knowing the language. But both instances of how hard it is for an immigrant in America, especially in Baltimore County, the suburb of Baltimore City, the Hispanic population is growing. According to the census, here from 1.8% in 2000 to 7% in 2020. This has very much complicated the racial composition of the Baltimore area, which is often seen within a white-black binary. My parents were immigrants on H-1B visas back in 1995, and there were also struggles with the language barrier. But my father went into scientific research, not construction. So that comparison also seems flimsy. I first learned English when I was 4 years old because I was sent back to China for 2 years. But after learning the language at 4, it's much easier than learning English at 15 or 16. At the end of the day, I think this is a plea for all of us to become more understanding and compassionate of immigrants who do the jobs that no one else wants to do, in search of a better life for themselves and their families. Obviously, I doubt this would soften anyone's stance on immigration, given the things the government has espoused on both sides of the fence for the last many years. It seems like this tragedy is only escalating and getting worse and more extreme. All politics aside, it's hard to look away and not notice when immigrants are the only ones who die when a bridge collapses like a house of cards. I commented to friends and family that being on a bridge when it collapses is probably one of the worst ways to die as well. No, being more compassionate and understanding of our immigrants probably won't stop the next freak accident like a container ship hitting a bridge or a car going through a construction barrier, but awareness and compassion can make experiences for immigrants a little bit better. I've traveled the world, so thank you, by the way, for that article. That article is awesome. And what I want to say is I've traveled the world, and I've been to so many different countries. And I've been in situations where I tried to speak and the person didn't understand English, and I did my best to try in a broken way to speak their language, and still there was frustration. But what I can tell you is these people, the one common thread that all mankind has is a thread of compassion and love. people want to help other people. People want to love other people. People want to enjoy other people's company. People thrive on building relationships and being around people. And I think that when we start discounting people based on their ethnicity or the color of their skin or who they worship or who they love, that brings us all down and takes us to a dark place. So my plea for you this week, as subscribers and listeners to this podcast, is to try to find a way to be just a little more understanding and a little more compassionate, and most of all, a little more patient. And I think that if we can find it in our heart to do those things and elevate our patience and just be better at what we do, that we will have room in our heart to help others who maybe don't understand and help them grow into people who can really not just contribute by doing the things that nobody wants to do, but we can elevate them to a state where they can work alongside us so that we can have a diversity of culture and a diversity of opinions help mold and shape the future of this great country. That's going to do it. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. Until next time, have a great week. Do take care. Stay agile, my friends.